The city shone like a bowl of polished copper under the December sky. Strings of Christmas lights wrapped around balconies and street poles, blinking red, green, and gold. Music drifted from shops, and the smell of roasted food followed people as they hurried home with bags in their hands. To anyone passing through, it looked like a place overflowing with joy. But beneath the bright lights, old beliefs sat heavy in people's hearts, like stones carried for generations. New buildings touched the clouds, yet ancient rules still decided who spoke, who listened, and who suffered in silence. In homes across the city, elders reminded children, "This season is holy. Watch your tongue." Christmas was meant to bind families together, a time when grudges were buried and blessings were counted. People said prayers louder and smiled wider, hoping heaven was listening. Yet everyone knew a hidden truth. Joyful days often forced painful secrets deeper. Truth, like a shy child, waited for moments of happiness before stepping forward, because pain always feared to spoil celebration. And so, in that sacred season, many wounds stayed covered, trembling beneath forced laughter. In one such home lived a child the family spoke about in low voices. Not spoken to, but spoken about. The child moved quietly, eyes always watching, ears always listening. When relatives gathered, whispers followed like shadows. "That one is slow," an aunt once murmured. "Unlucky," another added. "Not like the others," someone concluded. The child heard every word but answered none. Silence became armor. Silence became food. Silence became a way to survive in a house where speaking only brought pain. Growing up meant learning the art of comparison. Cousins were praised loudly, their achievements announced like festival drums. "Look at this one, top of the class. See how that one dresses, like success already knows their name." The child stood nearby, shrinking smaller with each word. In that family, worth was measured in money, titles, and loud approval. Shame was served daily, often disguised as advice. Over time, the child's heart learned to bruise quietly, without showing marks. The mother stood tall in that world. Neighbors greeted her with respect, lowering their voices when she passed. "She raised her children well," they said. "A strong woman. No nonsense." At gatherings, she spoke with confidence, her words sharp and final. She believed strength was built through hardness, like iron shaped by fire. "If I am soft, life will be cruel to you," she often said. But behind her firm steps lived a deep fear, the fear of being laughed at, of raising a child the community would call a failure. Shame haunted her like an unpaid debt. Inside the house, love followed strict rules. Obedience was praised more than understanding. Questions were seen as disrespect. Tears were weakness. The walls offered shelter from rain, yet they also trapped voices. Elders said, "A child must bend so they do not break the family." And so the child learned to bend. Each swallowed word, each hidden tear, became a lesson passed down without writing. Silence was not just expected, it was taught, practiced, and rewarded. As Christmas drew closer, the lights outside grew brighter, but inside, something restless stirred. The child felt it, like a drumbeat under the skin. Old beliefs had ruled long enough. And though no one could yet see it, the season of truth was slowly finding its breath. Laughter filled the room like loose stones thrown carelessly. Uncles leaned back in their chairs, clapping each other's shoulders. Aunts whispered behind covered mouths, their eyes sharp and curious. Cousins laughed the loudest, not because something was funny, but because laughter gave them safety. In that house, laughter was a shield. Silence sat beside it, just as cruel. When one aunt shook her head and said, "Some children are just born different," no one corrected her. When a cousin smirked and added, "Different is a polite word," the elders stared at their plates. Their quiet was permission. Their stillness turned gossip into truth, and truth into a weapon. The food was still warm when the words fell. The mother did not shout. She did not whisper. She spoke clearly, as if teaching a lesson. "You see this one," she said, pointing without mercy. "This stupid child has never understood effort." The room froze. Even the spoons stopped moving. Elders lifted their eyes, slow and heavy. The word hung in the air like a curse spoken by mistake, but never taken back. Heat rushed to the child's face. Shame crawled up the spine. To be corrected in private was pain enough. To be shamed before elders was a wound meant to last. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else coughed. No one spoke. Inside the child, something shifted. The familiar weight pressed down, but it no longer crushed. A thought rose, quiet but firm. If I stay silent now, I will disappear. The heart beat harder, not with fear alone, but with a strange strength. Endurance had kept the body safe, but it had starved the soul. The child lowered their eyes, then lifted them again. Silence cracked, not loudly, but enough to let air in. A buried truth stirred, stretching its roots. Blame had been a name long before it was spoken aloud. When a pot broke, eyes turned. When grades fell, fingers pointed. "Why are you always the problem?" an uncle once asked. "Trouble follows some children," an aunt agreed. The child learned to carry guilt like a borrowed bag, heavy but never theirs. Over time, the blame settled into the skin. It shaped how mirrors were faced and how dreams were measured. The family repeated it so often that even the child began to believe it. Doors opened easily for others. Cousins were sent to better schools, given new clothes, praised for small wins. "Go, your future is bright," elders said, smiling. When the child asked quietly, "What about me?" the answer was always later or silence. Later never came. The child watched opportunities pass like buses that did not stop. Acceptance came slowly, like learning to walk in the dark. Being left behind became normal. Wanting less became survival. Whispers followed everywhere. At the well. In the market. In church lines. "That one is cursed," someone said. "Lazy," another added. "Why waste help?" a neighbor asked. The words stuck like thorns. Community judgment became a second punishment, heavier because it wore many voices. Yet even then, the child listened, learned, and waited. In African tales, elders say the ground that listens longest grows the deepest roots. That night, as the house breathed in uneasy silence, those roots began to push upward, searching for light. That day arrived quietly, like harm often does. A neighbor's accusation spread faster than smoke, and soon elders were gathered, their faces hard with judgment. Something valuable had gone missing, and shame hovered over the family like a dark bird. Eyes turned to the smallest shoulders. "It must be this one," an uncle said, not unkindly, but certain. The mother hesitated only once. Then she nodded. A child must learn responsibility. The truth trembled in the child's chest, begging to be freed, but family pride spoke louder. The elders murmured approval. The blame was placed. Honor was saved. The child learned that day that love could choose the family's face over a child's heart. Rain fell that evening, steady and cold. The door closed softly behind the child, not as punishment, but as lesson. Inside, voices warmed themselves around food and stories. Outside, rain soaked thin clothes and washed dust into the ground. The child stood alone, watching light spill through a window, hearing laughter wrapped in comfort. No one meant harm, they said. Discipline builds character, they said. Yet the rain taught a deeper truth. Being left out hurts more than being struck. When the school report arrived, folded neatly and carried with care, hope walked in with it. The child waited. The paper spoke of effort, of quiet understanding, of growth not easily seen. But the room grew tight. "Grades are not enough," someone said. "We know this child," another replied. The paper was placed aside, never read aloud, never explained. Silence did the work of denial. From that day, the child's name changed in many mouths, and no one questioned why. A secret took root then, small, heavy, and lonely. It was the truth of that accusation, the rain, the unread words. The child carried it like a calabash filled with stones. Each step was careful. Each breath learned restraint. "Keep peace," the elders said. So peace was kept, even when it cut. Years passed, and learning came quietly. Without praise, the child learned to listen. Without reward, the child learned to see patterns others missed. Hands learned skills from watching. Ears gathered wisdom from stories told at dusk. When someone stumbled, the child helped without being seen. Strength grew like a tree behind the house, ignored but steady. An old woman once noticed and whispered, "This is the way." The river that makes no noise is often the deepest. But the old rule stood like a wall. Parents are never wrong. It was spoken as law, guarded by elders and repeated at tables. "Do not answer back," the mother would say. "Questions break families," an aunt warned. To question was rebellion. To speak was shame. And so the child stood between two worlds, the world of tradition that demanded silence, and a new understanding that whispered, "Truth heals." The ground beneath those feet began to shift, preparing the way for a voice that had waited long enough. The child grew older, and with age came a quiet understanding that no one ever spoke aloud. Bruises do not always live on the skin. Some hide deep inside the heart, where no eyes can see them. The child felt those wounds every day, in moments of praise given to others, in jokes that landed too close to truth, in silence that followed pain. Respect pulled one way, self-worth pulled the other. "If I speak, I dishonor them," the child often thought. "If I stay quiet, I disappear," the heart replied. This battle had no witness, yet it shaped every breath. The mother believed pain was a tool, not a danger. She spoke of life as a hard road that showed no mercy. "If I am gentle, the world will crush you," she said more than once. Her words came from fear, not hatred. Fear that weakness would invite shame. Fear that softness would make the family laughable. To her, love meant shaping a child like wood against stone, firm blows, sharp edges, no space for cracks. She did not see that too much force breaks what it tries to strengthen. When tears appeared, elders stepped in quickly. "Stop that," an old voice would say. "Tears are disrespect," another added. In their wisdom, crying was rebellion, and pain was proof of learning. Tradition stood tall, like an old tree casting a long shadow. Under that shadow, feelings were swallowed. Suffering was renamed discipline. The child learned early that showing hurt was more dangerous than hiding it. Outside the home, neighbors nodded in approval. "She is strict," they praised the mother. "That is how children succeed." Their words fell like blessings, yet they fed a quiet destruction. No one saw the nights of doubt, the shrinking spirit, the questions locked away. Public praise covered private damage like fresh paint over cracked walls. Society clapped while a child slowly bent. Then Christmas arrived, carrying both warmth and danger. The house filled with food, rich smells wrapping around old furniture. Laughter bounced from wall to wall. Plates clinked. Hands greeted hands. But beneath the joy lived old rivalries, like snakes asleep under heat. Every smile carried a measure. Every greeting weighed worth. Cousins sat proudly, their stories loud. "I just got promoted," one announced. "My results came first," another added. Eyes turned, measuring, counting. The child sat quietly, feeling numbers written in the air. Worth was being calculated again. Jobs, clothes, confidence. Success wore bright colors. Failure stayed silent. An aunt leaned close to another and whispered, not softly enough. "Some children shine. Others just exist." Laughter followed, light but sharp. The child felt the room tighten, like a drum pulled too far. Outside, Christmas lights blinked, unaware. Inside, pressure built, preparing the ground for words that would not stay buried much longer. The comparison came like a hand reaching into an old wound. A cousin stood to greet elders, confident and polished, praised for achievements spoken loudly. Eyes turned again, as they always did. "See how well this one has done," someone said. The words were not meant to hurt, yet they cut. The child felt the familiar heat of shame rise without permission. Memories stirred, carrying the same taste of smallness. The measure was unfair, but it was known. In that room, worth was a scale, and the child had been placed on it too many times before. The mother's voice followed, sharper than before, strong enough to travel. "At this age, some children bring honor," she said, glancing sideways. "Others still wait to be pushed." The room heard. Elders heard. Kin heard. Laughter did not follow this time, but the damage was done. The words landed like a drumbeat, sealing humiliation with witnesses. "Speak sense," an uncle muttered, not in defense, but in approval. The child lowered their eyes, feeling naked before blood and history. Then the room fell silent. Even the fire seemed to pause. Plates stopped moving. Breaths held. Time stretched thin, like cloth pulled too tight. In that stillness, the weight of generations pressed down, ancestors who endured without speaking, children who swallowed pain to keep peace. The silence asked a question no one wanted answered. Inside, a battle began. Fear stood tall, a wall made of names and belonging. To speak meant risking exile, not just from the house, but from identity. If you speak, you stand alone, the heart warned. If you stay quiet, you break again, the spirit replied. The cost was heavy either way. In this world, family was land. To be cut off was to wander without roots. A single word echoed louder than truth: ungrateful. The child had heard it before, carried like a spear. Gratitude had become a weapon, used to silence pain. After all we've done for you, voices would say. The child knew that love and harm can walk together, but explaining that felt impossible. Who would believe a wound that had no blood? Old warnings surfaced, passed down like a curse wrapped as wisdom. A child who talks back invites misfortune, elders often said. Tradition tightened like a chain, linking obedience to survival. The child remembered stories where spirits punished the defiant and blessed the quiet. Yet other stories whispered of truth-tellers who suffered first and healed many later. The child lifted their head slightly. The fear remained, but something else grew beside it, small, stubborn, alive. The room was still. The ancestors listened. Whether the child would speak or remain broken was not yet decided, but the heart had taken one step forward, and the night had begun to change. The silence had grown too heavy to carry. Each swallowed word pressed like a stone in the chest. The child, now almost grown, felt it shift, like a river breaking through a dam. Endurance had been survival, but it had begun to taste like betrayal of the self. The heart ached with every forced smile, every nod of agreement to stories that were not true. Something inside whispered, enough. Beneath that long practice of quiet, a seed had taken root. It had been buried deep, hidden under lessons and shame, yet it stirred now. A pulse of truth, faint but insistent, rose quietly. It promised release. It whispered that hope could survive even the heaviest soil. The child felt it, tremulous, fragile, and yet alive. The Christmas table was set, gleaming with food, with candles flickering like tiny guardians of tradition. Family sat around it, voices gentle, laughter measured, each plate a promise of unity. But beneath the surface, tension wound its way like a snake. Old judgments, whispered comparisons, and unspoken hurts lay hidden in every chair. The table, meant to hold together hearts, now threatened to reveal what had been buried too long. The child's gaze shifted from plate to plate, seeing the faces that had counted failures and praised others. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Finally, the voice rose, not in anger, not in rebellion, but in pain that had slept too long. "I have carried the weight of stories that are not mine," the child said softly, yet firmly. "I have hidden truths to keep our family's honor. I have taken blame that was never mine to bear." Silence deepened, thick and complete, as the words hung, trembling, in the room. Eyes widened. Some mouths opened, then closed. Ancestors seemed to lean closer, listening. The child revealed the sacrifice made in secret. "I gave up chances, opportunities, and my own dreams," they confessed, "so that no one would know the mistakes that were not mine. I shielded our name, and yet I suffered alone." The weight of those hidden years poured into the words. Each listener felt the cost, unspoken until now. The child had preserved honor at the price of their own youth. Then the lie emerged, the one the mother had allowed to stand. "A story was told to keep pride intact," the child continued. "It was repeated, nurtured, and protected. And everyone believed it. I lived under it. I grew under it. And it has lasted until tonight." The lie had grown tall, fed by silence, but now sunlight touched its edges. The family sat frozen, forced smiles gone, as the truth, patient and relentless, claimed its place at the sacred table. The room no longer offered comfort, it demanded reckoning. The child's voice did not falter this time. Every year of blame, every whispered accusation, every silent burden found words. "I was punished for what I did not do," they said. "I carried shame so that our family could appear strong, and yet no one ever saw my pain. The words stretched across the room, filling empty corners where silence had lived too long. Elders stiffened, uncles and aunts froze. The air thickened, heavy with the weight of unspoken complicity. Every witness was forced to reckon with their quiet, their nods, their smiles, their silent approval that had allowed harm to grow. Shock swept through the room like a sudden wind. Eyes widened, lips parted, hands stilled mid-air. Murmurs fluttered between chairs, but no one spoke clearly. Cousins who had laughed at earlier comparisons now pressed hands to mouths, trying to hold back disbelief. Even the youngest of relatives felt the tremor, sensing that something sacred had been disturbed. Time seemed to pause, stretched by the enormity of what had been spoken. The elders' faces betrayed their struggle. Their authority, built over decades on sacred rules, now wavered. One old uncle, his voice normally steady, said, "But tradition, we have always said," his words faltered. The elders were caught between the law of the past, obedience, respect, silence, and the living truth now confronting them. The stories they told at night to teach lessons seemed fragile in the face of the child's courage. The mother's voice rose, firm and sharp, a shield thrown up before any cracks could show. "This is not true," she exclaimed, her hands clenching. "You do not understand our ways. You speak lies to embarrass your family." Pride stood guard like a wall, shielding shame, refusing to acknowledge that the child's words were truth. But anger came next, sudden and roaring. "How dare you!" she shouted, rising from her seat. The sound rattled plates, made elders flinch. Power, once absolute, was challenged before every eye. The child did not retreat, though the mother's fury threatened to sweep them away like a storm. And yet, even behind the anger, cracks appeared. A quiver in the jaw, a pause too long between words, a hand trembling slightly. The mask of strength that had been worn so long began to break. Pain peeked through the authority, subtle but undeniable, revealing a human heart beneath the armor, a mother confronting both her pride and the consequences of silence. The Christmas lights above flickered, small sparks of color dancing unevenly across the walls. They had always promised warmth and celebration, but tonight their glow wavered, as if unsure how to illuminate a house trembling under the weight of truth. Faces that once smiled with ease now looked uncertain. The feast before them seemed smaller, the joy thinner, each flicker echoing the instability that honesty had brought. A dish slipped from a trembling hand and shattered on the floor. The crash rang louder than voices ever could, scattering porcelain fragments like memories long hidden. It was more than a plate. It was every silence that had been forced, every secret the child had carried alone. The sound marked a point of no return. No family could pretend that what had been spoken would vanish. The room fell utterly still. Silence, heavy and sharp, became louder than any shout. Breaths were caught mid-air. Eyes darted, avoiding and seeking at the same time. The words could not be unspoken, the truth could not be erased. Every heart felt the weight of what had been hidden for so long. The cost of pride became visible before all. Faces once certain now softened with recognition of damage done. Ancestors' stories of honor and obedience seemed suddenly brittle. Even the mother's authority, built for decades, faced its first questioning. What was once unquestionable, punishment, control, measured love, was now exposed to scrutiny. And with it came the collapse of a dangerous belief, that parents could never be wrong. The lie shattered like the dish on the floor. The child's words had lifted the veil, standing firm above the hierarchy of family pride. Truth claimed the center of the room, unwavering, undeniable. The house breathed differently. Some turned inward, carrying guilt and quiet regret. Others stared with shame, recognizing their complicity. Conversations slowed, whispers became careful, eyes lingered longer than before. Relationships had shifted, moved by the reckoning that had taken place. The house was divided now, not by walls, but by the weight of truth and the unspoken question of how to heal. The days after Christmas were quiet in ways that made the ears ache. Laughter that had once danced through the streets and rooms was replaced by whispers. Neighbors lingered near walls, voices low, words curling like smoke, carrying questions and judgments the child no longer feared to hear. Cousins exchanged glances that spoke of guilt, aunts and uncles muttered apologies that arrived too late. Even the wind seemed to move differently, carrying the weight of what had been revealed. Joy had been a fragile veneer, now cracked, giving way to reflection and the slow reckoning of hearts. The mother walked through the neighborhood with her head high, but the echo of the truth followed her. Praise that had once bolstered her pride now faltered in the eyes of the community. Old friends averted their gaze, neighbors whispered behind hands, and even the elders who had once nodded approvingly now exchanged hesitant glances. Authority that had been unquestioned was now tested not with rebellion but with quiet scrutiny. Each nod, each measured word, reminded her that respect could no longer be taken for granted. It had to be earned with justice, not fear. Inside, the child sat with a sense of calm unknown before. The need for approval had loosened its grip. No longer did they wait for smiles of understanding, no longer did they hope for praise that never came. Silence was no longer a shield, nor was obedience a survival strategy. Peace had been chosen, a quiet dignity that could not be shaken by voices or judgments. The weight of years lifted, replaced by a strength born not of compliance but of truth spoken and finally recognized. Late at night, the mother sat alone in the fading light, memories returning like a river's slow tide. She remembered a childhood shaped by harsh hands, words that stung like fire, and lessons disguised as discipline. Each recollection pressed against her chest, and she realized that the pain she had inflicted had been inherited, not deserved, a legacy passed down like a worn heirloom, not a destiny written by the gods. The very authority she had clung to now revealed itself as fragile, shaped by fear more than wisdom. She saw clearly how pain had traveled through generations, mistaken for love, carried as tradition, wrapped in duty. Children had been asked to endure, to obey, to survive in silence. And now she understood that authority without mercy breaks homes, that strength imposed through fear leaves only hollow respect. Humility crept into her heart, softening the edges of pride. She was not fully redeemed, but she was awake, awake to the truth that love must balance with justice, that compassion does not weaken power but defines it. And in that awakening, a seed of change began to grow, fragile yet unstoppable, like new shoots after a long, hard winter. The child, now no longer a child in spirit, let the tears fall freely, each drop carrying away the name that had never truly belonged. Slow, unlucky, stupid, words that had clung to the heart for years, washed away in streams of long-held pain. Each sob was a reclaiming of self, a quiet declaration that identity could not be shaped by fear, gossip, or pride. The heart, once cramped under the weight of others' expectations, stretched with the courage of honesty. Comfort was no longer the goal, dignity had been chosen. Fear had been replaced by a steady pulse of inner strength. The cost of truth was high, but it was the only coin worth paying. With the first light of dawn, a new self emerged. No longer bowed by shame or silence, the spirit walked forward unbroken. The world could judge, whisper, or demand submission, but the soul remained unshaken, fully adult in the ways that truly mattered. And in the village, elders would tell the story for generations, that a child who speaks truth is never lost, that silence may hide the heart but cannot protect it, and that justice, even at a sacred table, shines brighter than pride. Christmas ended not with loud joy or perfect scenes, but with honesty. Quiet hope lingered like embers in the hearth, warm and steady. Strength had been found, not in appearances or approval, but in the unbowed courage to claim one's own truth.